Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Palo Alto's presentation of the arguments, both pro and con, of the 6 ballot measures appearing on the Santa Clara County ballot, 5 statewide measures, and 1 Bay Area regional measure. The primary will take place on June 5th, 2018. I'm Mary Jo Levy, and along with my colleague, Veronica Tincher, we will be providing you with information on all the ballot measures. First, some background. The League was formed in 1920 after women received the right to vote. At that time, the League women realized they were unfamiliar with current issues and decided to learn about them. After educating themselves, they wanted to share what they learned with the community, as we are doing today. The League is a non-political organization. This means that the League never supports or opposes candidates or political parties. The League has 2 distinct roles. One is voter service and the other advocacy. In our voter service role today, the hat we are wearing, we will present impartial information. Although there are League positions on some of these ballot measures, in this program we will not present them or our own personal opinions. In preparation for today, we have read the measures themselves, reviewed websites, neutral as well as partisan ones, read editorials, and compared notes with others studying the issues. We will give you the facts about the ballot measures and the arguments that the proponents and opponents are making. We will not judge the merits of the arguments or guarantee their validity. Let's get started. There is a saying going around that democracy is not a spectator sport. So Veronica and I will help you participate in democracy by walking you through all the measures on your Palo Alto ballot for the June primary. We will take turns speaking, so you will hear voices change as we explain each measure. As we talk, think about whether the propositions are simple or complex, what the financial implications are, whether or not it's a constitutional change, that is one that can only be amended by another statewide vote, and whether the measure is overall good policy or bad policy. There are 5 proposed state propositions that every voter in California will be considering, and 1 regional measure that the voters in all Bay Area counties will consider. All of the propositions pass if a majority of voters are in favor of them. For each proposition, we will describe what the situation is now, how the proposition changes the status quo, what the impact is on the state budget or your pocketbook, and what the arguments are for and against the proposition.
So I'm going to start with Proposition 68, which is a bond measure for raising money for the environment, parks, and water. This bond measure has been put on the ballot by the legislature with a 2/3 vote and the signature of the governor. So the way it is now, California spends money about $15 billion a year for projects for conservation, parks and recreation, food and flood protection, safe drinking water, and such things. These are paid for out of bonds that have already been passed in the past, and some funds are still existing from those bonds. So what does 68 propose? It proposes to raise $4 billion more in new bonds, use those proceeds at about $100 million a year and then including some of the existing outstanding bonds. For programs like we just described above, conservation, parks and recreation, and so forth, and also for climate change mitigation for habitats. There's a point in this measure that includes cost sharing for local government projects. Especially priority is given to disadvantaged communities such as, in fact, the East Palo Alto flood control. So the fiscal effect is that they will spend about $400 million a year over 40 years. That includes all the principal and interest payments. With the average interest rates, it estimates about 2 to 1. In other words, for every dollar spent, $2 will have to be spent to pay back the bond's interest and principal. Those who are in favor of the bonds say that the parks expand access and maintenance, and that this protects natural resources, especially along the coast. And those who are against the bonds say that California already has one of the largest deficits of any state, and a lot of the dollars have been spent on pet projects for politicians.
Proposition 69 is about transportation funding. Note that this measure is a constitutional amendment. If it passes, it can only be amended by another statewide vote. Proposition 69 currently is affected as a result of the state recognizing that maintenance and building of California highways and other traffic-related infrastructure, as well as public transportation systems, has been very insufficient. Last year, a package was passed to increase the annual state transportation funding. It's called the Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017. This increased excise taxes on gas and diesel fuel, and which, as required by the Constitution, is dedicated only for transportation purposes. The bill also increased sales taxes on diesel fuel and a variety of vehicle registration fees, including one for electric cars. The vehicle fees and diesel taxes are not restricted only for transportation purposes. And in the past, there has been a history of California governmental officials tapping unrestricted transportation funds to cover budget shortfalls. So what Proposition 69 would do, if passed, is to lock in income from diesel sales taxes and new registration fees, so the income will be solely dedicated to transportation project. Further, it would exempt transportation expenditures from a government spending limit which was set in 1978 and 79. You've probably heard of it. It's familiarly called the GAN limit. In terms of the bottom line, this proposition would not raise taxes. If passed, the state loses flexibility in responding to unexpected or emergency needs that are not transportation related. If it does not pass, then transportation funds may be allocated to non-transportation purposes. Those in favor of this measure argue that it is the only way to be sure that transportation revenues are used for transportation needs. It prohibits the legislature from using the funds for non-transportation needs and prioritizes repair of deteriorating roadways. Supporters include the Commissioner of the California Highway Patrol, the President of the League of Women Voters of California, and the President of the Chamber of Commerce. Financial support in favor of this measure as early as April was a little bit over $500,000. Those against the measure say that the state has plenty of money to fix our roads. They argue that while the measure will safeguard funding for roads, a portion is allocated for transit and high-speed rail, not roads. Also, there is concern about the exemption from the GAN limit, which may result in more government spending. Those against the measure include a state senator from the 37th District and an assemblyman from the 5th District. No financial contributions in opposition to this measure were reported as of early April.
I'm going to talk about Proposition 70, which is another constitutional amendment put on the ballot by the legislature. And it's called the Cap and Trade Amendment. The way it is now, we know that, or scientists have told us, that greenhouse gases cause climate change. So greenhouse gases come from cars, power generators, and industry running fossil fuel, and they create the greenhouse gases. There are many programs already on the books to try to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, such as the one that you just heard about, Proposition 69, which raises taxes from vehicles. This cap and trade measure concentrates on emissions coming from stationary facilities, particularly industry. The cap and trade idea is a market-based incentive solution for reducing greenhouse gases. In California, it started in 2012, and the law originally had it end in 2020 with the goal that greenhouse gas emissions throughout the state would reach those that were experienced in 1990. Cap means that they would reduce the annual amount of emissions that would be allowed statewide every year until they reach this goal in 2020. Trade means that some industries might actually have less emissions than they would be allowed to have, and they would then be able to sell their surplus emissions to other industries that have a problem with more emissions than required. What happens is that these industries must buy a permit and pay into this fund with this permit, and the permit then allows them to emit a certain amount per year. The revenue from these sales and the auction of the permits goes to what's called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and it's dispersed by the legislature with a majority vote for various programs throughout the state that are set up to help the environment. About $3 billion is estimated to be dispersed this year from these permit sales. There are particular incentives built in for high-speed rail, public transit, and so forth. If you look in your California voter information guide, you can actually find a chart that shows you the details of where these monies go. In 2017, the legislature approved a bill to extend cap and trade from 2020 to 2030 to reach this 1990 emissions level, giving it more time. At the same time, they also exempted sales tax on the sales of certain equipment that's used for manufacturing, and that also runs concurrently until 2030. So what does Proposition 70 do? In 2024, all cap and trade revenue will go into a special reserve fund, not the reduction fund, but another fund called the reserve fund. Sales tax levied on formally exempt sales will be eliminated, and all disbursements will stop. By a 2/3 vote of the legislature, they can reinstate the reduction fund, disperse revenue as before, and continue the sales tax exemption only after the approval with a 2/3 vote. Then everything goes back to the situation that we now have with the special fund from which the legislature can disperse money by a majority vote. In effect, this is a pause requiring a supermajority to continue dispersing the permit sale revenue. So what's the effect on the budget? It is that the the increase in sales tax revenue, because that exemption would stop until the authorization went through the legislature. So there would be some increased sales tax revenue, both state and local government, as long as the authorization has not gone through. This would also delay disbursement on certain ongoing funds, projects that have already been started, and they would be halted until the 2/3 vote had passed. Those that say that this is that are supporting this project, this proposal, say that the 2/3 vote is a special hurdle, and it prevents political pet projects from being dispersed. And it allows for a certain time to actually stop and evaluate the effect of cap and trade. Those who are against the proposal say that the 2/3 vote may be very difficult to achieve, allowing a 1/3 to hold hostage on the passage, and that the oil industry is attempting to weaken the state energy project.
Proposition 71, the ballot measure effective date. This is also a constitutional amendment. Currently, if a proposition passes by vote of the electorate, it becomes law the day after the election. However, often the voting tally isn't completed by the day after the election. It may take a few weeks to certify the final tally. So what we're talking about now is perhaps the simplest measure to understand that you will vote on in this election. The budget, this measure is very simple to understand. It takes the date of the effective propositions. It makes the date of the effective propositions that pass occur after all the votes are counted and certified, no later than 43 days after an election. And the value of this is that if there's a mail-in vote, then people's vote will be counted before the law goes into effect if it passes. Currently, there's no projected budget effect on this measure. Those in favor say this is a common sense measure, especially when more and more voters vote by mail, so more ballots take time to be counted. Supporters include the Speaker of the California Assembly and the President of the League of Women Voters of California. Those opposed to the argument say that the current law already allows for retracting implementation of a law should the final vote be different from the day after the vote. There is one opponent to this proposition, and that person is an attorney at law.
Proposition 72 is the last of the state constitutional amendment propositions that we'll talk about today. It's about rainwater capture systems to be excluded from state taxes, from property taxes, I beg your pardon. It's also a legislative constitutional amendment. The way it is now, Proposition 13, which we are pretty familiar with, puts a limit on property tax. It says that 1.1% of assessed value is the limitation, and the tax limitation, and that property can only be reassessed at the time of when it's new or sold or changed ownership. And that can, so other than that, it can only increase by 2% a year. Improvements, such as a major renovation or an addition, such as you might have to a home, may increase the property value, therefore increase the property tax. Currently, some improvements, such as safety measures, disability access, solar energy systems, are already exempt from an increase in property value. What does 72 do? 72 establishes an exemption from property tax being reassessed when new rainwater capture and storage systems are installed anytime between 2018 through 2026. If the property is sold, however, the rainwater capture system would be included in any reassessment. It turns out that the fiscal effect, that the effect on the budget is fairly minimal when you consider around the whole state of California the property tax revenue, and that local government would probably see little or no effect from the proposal, and that this would actually enhance storage of reduction of water of utility water resources. Those who are in favor of this proposal say that the exempt property tax incentive is an incentive to install rainwater capture systems, and it's good for the environment to reduce utility produced water. And there are no published arguments against this proposal.
Is it my turn? Yeah. Regional Measure 3, Bay Area Traffic Relief Plan and the Bay Area Bridge Authority. This measure is a proposal, actually, to raise tolls on all Bay Area bridges, except the Golden Gate. It will be voted on in all 9 Bay Area counties. Right now, if you cross one of the 7 San Francisco Bay state-owned bridges, the cost is $5. Of the funds collected, they are divided with 40% allocated for bridge operations, maintenance, and area transit, and 60% allocated for seismic retrofit of the bridges. If this proposal is passed, it will raise bridge tolls by $1, phased in over 6 years from 2019 to 2025, up to a total of $3 additional, or a total bridge toll of $8. Thereafter, any change in the toll would be linked to inflation. The Metropolitan Transportation Commission, whose board is represented by elected officials from all Bay Area counties, worked with the state legislature to authorize this measure as a way to finance a comprehensive suite of highway and public transportation improvement projects, including buses, ferries, and BART, along the toll bridge corridors and their approach routes. This measure also includes projects for traffic bottleneck relief and bike and pedestrian safety. An independent oversight committee comprised of representatives from all 9 Bay Area counties will be responsible for fiscal reviews and reporting to the legislature. Passage of this measure is by a majority of vote from the combined Bay Area counties. In other words, the total vote count in all Bay Area counties must be combined and taken together. If there is not a majority San Francisco Bay Area county-wise, then the measure will not pass. The funds collected by tolls will, over time, finance $4.5 billion in highway and traffic projects and support $60 million annually for new bus and ferry services. The expenditure plan matches investment in each county to the anticipated toll burden of its residents. It is recommended that you review your county voter information guide for lengthy details on all the projects by category and by county. Those in favor of this proposition mention the traffic infrastructure improvements and the value of the independent oversight committee role if the measure passes. In addition, supporters decry the negative impact traffic congestion has on everyone's quality of life and overall traffic efficiency. They mention the need for a long-term solution to improve travel times and upgrade the transit system. Many supporting articles appear in the cited website on this screen, yes, on rm3.com. Supporters in our area include the mayors of Palo Alto and San Jose, the president and CEO of Silicon Valley Leadership Group, and the president of the Santa Clara County Firefighters. Those opposed to this proposition mention that the bridge tolls are a regressive fee for low-income drivers. They say the tolls have a heavier impact upon those living on the north and east side of the bay, who must travel across the bridges to the job-rich areas in San Francisco and the peninsula. The new toll will amount to about $750 more per year for bridge commuters. They also have concerns about administrative issues. Might the funds be diverted to other projects? What if there are cost overruns? And they note that the overall oversight committee is not required to report to the public. Consult the website listed on this slide, occupymtc.org, for much more information. Opponents include the mayor of Mountain View, a Santa Clara County supervisor, the president of the Silicon Valley Taxpayers Association, and the chair of the Libertarian Party of Santa Clara County.
So I'm going to talk a little bit more about some issues that you will be finding on your ballot come the June 5th primary. The first issue is to do with what we call the top two open primary system. This originated back in 2010, and the way it used to work before we had the open primary, voters who were registered in a particular party voted on candidates in the primary running in their own party as primary candidates. Voters not registered in a party at all, such as what we think of as called sometimes independent, could not vote at all on party candidates. Come November, the top candidate from each party was on your November ballot, and all voters had the same ballot and could choose candidates from amongst any party. Local offices are nonpartisan in California, and therefore all voters, regardless of party registration or not, can choose candidates from those ballots. Now, the way the open primary works when it was established in 2010 is that there's one long ballot, and all voters now, regardless of their party registration, vote on candidates for each office regardless of the candidate's party affiliation. Therefore, all, regardless of whether they're registered in a party or not. No party preference voters have the ability to vote for formally partisan offices in the primary. Top two candidates overall from each office then proceed to the November ballot, regardless of party affiliation again. So it's very possible that two candidates from the same party should appear on the November ballot. Again, all voters, as before, have the same ballot in November. The effect on this is also noted that minor parties, such as the Green and Libertarian, which do not have large registrations, are unlikely to even appear on the November runoff. The next issue I would like to call to your attention is about a recall. So recall elections are rare, and in fact there is one on our ballot this year in Santa Clara County for the recall of Judge Aaron Persky. So first of all, what is a recall? It allows voters to consider removing an elected official before their term comes up for the re-election. No reasons for having a recall are required in law. And again, as I said, they are rarely used. I believe only one time has a Superior Court judge come to the ballot for recall. You may recall the governor recall that we had in California in 2004, and there were some 165 candidates who lined up in the event that the recall was successful, that then were one of whom was then elected, and that could, elicited considerable attention. So how does a recall work? It could be at the state, or in this case, it's at the local level. People proposing a recall file a notice of intention, and in that notice, they list the reasons for why the recall should be had, and they are stated as proponents of recall. The incumbent in that office then is allowed to state reasons why he or she should not be recalled, and the intention to recall is published publicly. The Registrar of Voters permits signature gathering at this point, and a number of signatures must be gathered to equal at least 20% of the number of votes cast for that office in the last election. In other words, in this case, it's a judge's office, a county judge. Signers must be registered voters in the jurisdiction of the elected office. The registrar then declares a recall election if there was sufficient number of signatures. If there were a large number of signatures turned in, the registrar may take samples to determine whether there's a sufficient number that are valid. So what happens on election day? The registrar will publish the intention, the notice, and the response from the incumbent, and arguments in the voter information pamphlet. Candidates who have filed to run in the event that the recall succeeds are on the same ballot, and they will also have a chance to place their statements in the voter information pamphlet. Voters then have various options in how they want to cast their vote. They can choose yes or no on the recall. They do not have to vote for one of the candidates in waiting, or they can vote for one of the candidates in waiting. If the majority vote is to recall, then the candidate with the most votes replaces the incumbent.
And now we'll turn this process of preparing to vote over to you. And here's some suggestions for your homework. If you are registered to vote, you should have already received your sample ballot from the County Registrar of Voters. It provides extensive information on the Regional Measure 3. Also, you should have already received your official voter information guide, which issued by the Secretary of State. It has information on Propositions 68 to 72, including the state legislative analyst's comments. Consult both of these for arguments from those in favor of or opposed to the propositions. Other sources of online information on ballot measures include Voters Edge, which includes information on the sources of funding in favor or against ballot measures, and Cal Access. Both are listed on your screen, as well as Ballot, and we also recommend Ballotopedia, BALLOTPEDIA.org, and CA Votes, CaliforniaVotes.org, CAVotes.org, which is a League of Women Voters California website which provides several sources of voting information. After you've done all your preparation for the June primary, in order to vote, you must be registered. If you're not, or you have moved, the last day to register to vote or change your address is May 21st.
Thank you for taking time to listen to and look at the slides of our presentation today. It's been a pleasure to help you and to talk through the issues and hopefully it will allow you to make informed decisions before you exercise your democratic right to vote. And thank you to the Mid-Peninsula Media Center for your support to bring this important information from the League of Women Voters on May 2nd.